Welcome back to all our online and physically present listeners and colleagues. So now we're having the first of three panels today, and in this panel we're going to discuss strategies for liberating curatorial processes from various current power structures. We're not going to be going into those power structures right now so very much in this panel. The strategies include participatory and dialogical and process-oriented approaches, as well as collective and self-organized, perhaps automatic or even indeterminate and random forms of program development. When we remember, for example, ancient practices of governance, we realize that choosing participants in governance by lottery could also be an effective tool for democracy. Lisa Lim has also just pointed out in Du Yun's keynote that there's also the need for leadership from within each community, from within many different communities. So curating doesn't have to be done by one curator. Its relevance and coherence doesn't have to be assumed to issue from one vision emanating from one point of view. The obvious limits for what can be curated by a curator working top-down are considerable and are unlikely to truly honor demands of diversity and greater access in the arts and in music and sound art. So our focus for this hour and a bit is on the role of curators and curating today in fostering diversity and provoking change by negotiating topics that are relevant for a hopefully pluralistic society. Also, we'll discuss how regional contexts influence perspectives on curating and create completely new approaches and musical emphases that shift our understanding of what is contemporary in music and in life. Our regional context now is, of course, that this symposium is organized and hosted in Berlin with the dominance of European participants and Europe-centered perspectives. European curators are typically occupied with questions of how to expand programs, how to embrace and include more and more non-European perspectives or even inner European perspectives, such as gender and so on. A concern which is in itself a form of friendly colonialism and which takes place on a terrain full of pitfalls such as tokenism, exoticism, and appropriation. On this panel, we want to go, first of all, straight to issues and strategies of curating in several particular and contrasting regional contexts. And secondly, we will deal with the interconnection of regional contexts through transfer of artworks and productions between one context and another. Not forgetting, of course, the trans-regional nature of more and more artists and curators' own lives and biographies, as we've already been reminded this morning. There is a difference between regarding internationalism in the arts as a form of government-supported cultural tourism, an exchange between national cultural ministries, etc., and asking how the arts are affected by and involved in migration and migration's complex chains of causality and effect. True that at the time we're living in, with this as a hybrid panel, we have one member in Berlin, Stephanie Karp, others in Beirut, Moscow, and New York. Please correct me, panel members, if you have moved since we planned this. You are joined again by Du Yun and also by Sharif Senawi in Beirut, by Artyom Kim in Moscow, speaking of his experiences from Tashkent, amongst other places. Yes, and Stephanie Karp here in Berlin. During the course of this panel, Sharif and Artyom and Stephanie will each give a medium-short statement on the issues that are at the front of their minds within curating right now, and on strategies and methods that they adopt or invent within curatorial frameworks. And in between these individual statements, there will be some discussion between the panel members in response to one another's works and methods. And finally, at the end, there will be a more general discussion with questions and answers involving all of you. I would like us to remember that in this zone of dynamic curating, many methods and strategies arise ad hoc in response to particular situations and only reveal themselves as such and as best practice cases or working models when we sit here, like today, and talk about them. So I think it's our job today to table as many as possible of these cases, solutions, and ways of thinking from which we can then extract models and strategies when we get home. So first of all, I would like to call on Sharif Senawi, who is in Beirut, joining us from Beirut. Hello. And Sharif is working at the Irtijal Festival, which he co-founded and has curated ever since its beginning. He works as a musician, guitarist within experimental and improvisational practices, and these improvisational practices reach out to many places, including the Echtzeitmusik scene here in Berlin, but also go deep into local and regional practices in the Arabic and Middle Eastern region. Sharif, would you like to take it from the top with what's on your plate right now?
Do you hear me? Do you hear me well?
We hear you well.
What's on my plate right now is maybe very disconnected from the topic of this webinar, this seminar. So I was more like thinking to give the general context of curating in Lebanon. At the moment, it's mostly survival strategies because of the situation in the country. And we don't really have the luxury to curate anything. We're trying to save the scene, and most musicians are actually leaving for better to live in better places. So it's more of a dramatic situation at the moment. But to stay in the topic of the seminar, I thought just to explain how, in a way, being pretty much an active musician internationally, but mostly as a curator, mostly active in Lebanon and in other places in the Arab world, how this diversity issue is very different than what we have in Europe. And was actually imposed on us. So initially, when we started our festival, our programming, our workshops about 20 years ago, a bit more than that, we didn't want to be diverse, which is ironical. We actually wanted to promote improvisation, contemporary music, and all these practices in our area of the world. We wanted to promote them as aggressively as possible and basically impose this very alien are you hearing me well? Because I'm hearing some weird noises as I'm speaking.
For us, it's working great.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm hearing as if like some ghosts were passing by and whales and things like this.
It's not us.
Okay, great. So, so basically, yeah, initially we wanted to be, like 20 years ago, we wanted to be a radical, new and improvised music militants, and basically bring them to our area of the world, which where they didn't exist, or very, 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 in very rare instances before we arrived. But then we noticed in a way how alien and removed we were from the context, the specific context of the country, and very, very early on, like really in the first and second edition, we decided, okay, we're promoting a kind of music which people have no reference to, they have nothing to relate it to. It's just coming as if it's emerging out of the blue, without background, without a specific history, without even a need by the local scene to have this kind of music, at least in the beginning. And we had to start imagining ways to bring people to it. Not only audience, but also musicians, to make them understand what it is about, how it evolved, and yeah, without having people feeling that it's in a way we were in the colonial. We although locals we're in the colonial position, like we're bringing something completely from abroad, which is disconnected from the surrounding, and trying to impose it almost like a colonial entity. Uh, what are the solutions we found? Basically, they're pretty much in the cooperation idea that I saw mentioned at many points during the earlier sessions. So okay, let's say I'm a radical free improviser, and I'm meeting a guy who plays traditional music. How can I communicate with him? How can I let him know, understand what I'm doing? What's the link between what he is doing? What is a link possible? And it took many failures and misunderstandings, and also disastrous experiments to reach a point 20 years later where the various scenes in Lebanon are almost merged. It's beautiful in a way, and of course we didn't expect this in the beginning, but we really came before the multiple crises that hit us recently and is almost erasing the Lebanese musical scene as we speak. So before this crisis, we came to a point where it was extremely possible to build an orchestra where you would have musicians coming from very different fields of music, traditional, the various currents of traditional, it's not just one traditional music. You have many different characters who have many different outlook on traditional music itself, to mix them with people coming from a more classical training, to people coming from experimental, from electronics. And you could imagine having all these people working together without sounding like fusion music, like piling up different styles, but actually these people had worked together so much on various different projects that new languages were emerging at the time. And so once you have these new languages, you can build upon them, capitalize upon them, and have genuine collaborative work, which instead of just making 1 + 1 = 2, give you a 1 + 1 = 1, like a completely new one in a way. So yeah, this was never a strategy in itself, although now I feel that this is becoming, at least in Europe, in contemporary music, the purpose of a strategy, whereas in our case, it came by default, almost like a fix to a problem, like a fix to something we weren't able to get across. So in order to fix it, we did it. I don't know if I still have time, but basically just to explain, for example, how Irtijal Festival works. So because we couldn't curate like a full festival of improvised and contemporary music, we started including all types of creative and innovative forms of music in it very early on, whatever we could find. Even an instrumental rock band, which had a minimal experimental component, very small. So we felt compelled that we have to include it in order to encompass the entire local music scene, which was a tiny scene, like very few players at the time, 20 years ago. So we'd include them we basically include anybody who was involved in any type of innovation. Later on, as the scene developed and there were many more projects, and also we were able to curate more diversity from abroad, the festival itself, Irtijal, which became basically an old, well-established festival, the curatorial line was, it has to be a trip for the audience into the realm of new and innovative music. And we called it an experimental music festival, although, as you know, experimental music doesn't exist. So it was just a word to encompass the possibility to have experiments in all styles of music. And the more diverse the festival is, the more styles are present, the more collaborations you have, the more we felt the audience was compelled, the atmosphere was positive, and it slowly became the identity of the festival. This is like started in 2008, so like this is about clearly, it became clear about 12 years ago. And today I feel many festivals in Europe are looking for this, especially contemporary music festival, which I feel is a positive development, of course. And so in a way, from a completely different perspective, the debate came to be, how do we diversify our programs? How do we basically break with our very radical past, which was justified at the time, but maybe no longer today.
Thank you so much. One word, just in case we still have the persistent noise problem. Check that all the microphones in here are turned off, please. If anyone's got anything on. Thank you so much for that. So you can't curate at the moment. You have said, and you didn't want to be diverse. And this is so we already have the wrong title for today for your situation.
That was a long time ago.
And I want, of course, I wanted to ask you with this, what you've described of sort of bringing together what is traditional with a kind of radical militant improvisation practice with all that drive. How do you feel about the relevance of? I mean, you have this unfortunate expertise of curating in a crisis, which it is easy for Europeans to romanticize about, that is wonderfully dynamic and so on. But how do you feel with all the experience that you've just described for us, your possibilities for continuing with the festival? What new directions are possible at all? Yeah.
Well, I was pretty happy with the situation before. I'd like to first go back to how things were a few years ago, and then move forward again, because now we're basically only moving backwards. But yeah, this is due to the context in Lebanon. Probably many of you don't know what the situation is. I mean, probably you all know we had some dramatic events, but the crisis is much deeper. So now what I'm doing now, I'm just basically trying to find out who's not leaving the country, because everybody's leaving, all the musicians are leaving, understandably, and how to basically keep these musicians, to keep them believing that they are musicians, to keep their creative process going, not to succumb, like to give up, basically, especially the younger generation, especially people who are just starting to imagine that they could be musicians, to try to start to have a musical career. Basically to try to tell them, don't give up, you can still have a musical career, please come, let's do this project, let me commission this work. I mean, as Irtijal, let us pay you to do this, you know, let us still make you feel that you are a professional musician and that you can earn money from it. So it's now micro strategies, really. We are now very far away from what I was talking about before, sadly, but I'm not sure this is the topic of this seminar, to be honest.
It's your situation, and it's a situation that we're interested to hear about. Before I open just to the rest of the panel for the moment, just if, before we go on to Artyom Kim, I just wanted to ask if anyone in the panel wanted to already give some feedback on this, so either the kind of the work that you have done up to now, or the situation that you're in now with feeding local processes as a matter of musical existence. Okay, well then we'll leave all of this hanging in the air, and thank you so much, Sharif, and we will introduce now Artyom Kim from presently in Moscow, otherwise from Tashkent. Artyom Kim is running the Omnibus Ensemble in Uzbekistan, and has also co-founded it and cultivated it as a place for collective composition and music making, which has a spiritual dimension, which has also roots in Uzbeki cultural practices, and which is deeply committed to turning around the idea that music reflects on crisis and burning issues of our time, but could actually be a tool for change or for activation within the issues of our time. Artyom, thank you for joining us.
Hello, can you hear me? Is it okay? Good. Hello, everybody. Thanks for inviting, and everything what Sharif told about his situation with his ensemble and the musical scene in his place is very much relevant and very much the same in our country. So I have no, I don't know why to repeat it. I just maybe can share with you some practical strategies, some practical tools which we were using to solve absolutely the same kind of questions, the same kind of problems which were appearing during our rehearsing during our rehearsals and during the realizations of our projects. And I think it is very much connected to the process of curating and to the theme of our symposium, because in the very simple but very basic sense, the process of curating is the process of talking with different people, with artists, with managers, with sponsors. And it is very much about collecting the information and then the following analysis and then the making decision. And here I would like to say, I would like to mention that this process should not be limited by simple collecting the ideas on the informational level. It should be accompanied by certain exchange on emotional and spiritual level. Actually, in the first place, the talk with artists, in between artists, should be an exchange of on emotional and spiritual levels. And it is necessary to observe this process in this way, because only in this case, I think, it is possible to generate principally new ideas. So if to put it in very practical and simple form, if I'm a curator and if I'm talking with an artist, I would ask this artist not only to represent her or his points of artistic views, but I would ask him or her to work together with me during our talk on generating completely, principally new concepts, new ideas which never existed before, neither in my head or in the head of this artist. And as it has been mentioned in Du Yun's video, then some accident will happen. Some unruliness is very much necessary as a condition for any kind of talk with artists. In our case, during the talk of curator and artist, in order to generate a new concept for a production, for a project. And it is like, I would ask this artist to co-create together with me an idea. And it is something like if we would compose music together. And to achieve this effect, to achieve this result, we, together with my team, for years of our work, we discovered that certain physical techniques, psychophysical techniques are necessary to be used. And we developed our own psychophysical technique, which we called the method for collective resonance composing. And the basic principle of this method is to establish a certain resonance between the participants of the project, of the process, of the creative process. Not only intellectual resonance, but also physical resonance, mental resonance, emotional resonance, and spiritual resonance. And two key principles here in this method are, the first one is provocative paradoxical questions. And the second principle is the establishing of constant loop of retelling the answers, reinterpreting the answers on this provocative paradoxical question. So my statement to be discussed with you would be to think about a certain strategy while talking with people during the process of curating, while talking with artists, with artistic people, and with people in general, instead of collecting individual points of view, to generate new concepts, principally new concepts collectively. So I would say this is the first statement which I propose to you to be discussed. And I would call this statement like a micro strategy, the strategy for distance face to face. And the second statement I would call the statement for the strategy for distance from the bird eye panorama, from very much above. And for this, I would propose you to think about, from many aspects of the curatorial process today, from many aspects, I would like to mark the aspect of interdisciplinarity, because we see that today the most important discoveries in science, the discoveries which open new horizons in science, are happening in between disciplines, in between neurobiology and physics, in between history and mathematics. And I believe that in music, we simply have no choice. We have to be active participants of this process. And I would call this process of getting more and more interdisciplinary as a process of reconsidering what does it mean to be a composer today, what does it mean to be a performer today, and what does it mean to be a listener today. And again, if to put it into simple way, into simple words, if I would be a curator talking with a composer, I would ask this composer to create together with me during our talk a new, principally new concept of a project, when this composer is not only a composer, when he or she is a composer and a conductor and a stage director of the performance. Or if I would be a composer and while talking with a musician with whom I work at the moment, I would ask this musician to create a concept when this musician is not only the performer, when this musician is performer and composer, when this musician, performer and composer and listener. So my second statement here which I would propose for you to discuss is the reconsidering the roles of composers, performers, and listeners today in music today, and to finding new formats of what is composer, what is music, and what is performer, and what is listener collectively. Thank you. That's all what I propose you to think about.
Very much, Artyom. That's very clear, and thank you for kind of bringing out this idea also not only that collectivity is about talk between people, but it's also that we ourselves are often have many roles, and that to acknowledge those different creative roles as going in and out of each other in development. So now I think I'm going to actually move straight on as we want to have good time for the discussion with everyone at the end. I'm going to move straight on to welcome into the discussion Stephanie Karp here in Berlin with me. Stephanie Karp is the director of the Ruhrtriennale and has been vocal in talking about the political aspects of curating. She has also had to talk about the political aspects due to the politicization of works that she's presented and people that she's presented. And we have invited her here today specifically as someone not coming from the musical field, because so many of these issues or discourses have already been running ahead in other disciplines and in theatre, and this is kind of particularly inspiring for us within music to be able to look at how you already have been working with post-colonial and discussions. Yeah.
Thank you for these beautiful statements. Curating in my field means different activities. It is either might be creating a diverse ensemble in a theater house. It may be the practice of making a program more diverse. It may be the practice of festival making, of international curating. That is what I have done in the last about 10 years. And there it is a big difference I found out now by the last 3 years when I worked as an intendant for the Ruhrtriennale, whether you curate an international and post-colonial program for a small international festival or production house like Hebbel Theater here in Berlin, then you are doing exactly what you are supposed to do, or whether you do the same work and try to make try to open the post-colonial space in a big representative festival like Ruhrtriennale. There, this way of curating is immediately a political statement which is very critically regarded, like under a microscope. And also the fact, if you try to make really creations which are shifting, what I was always interested in, which are shifting between the genres, between the music and the language and the performance. I want to point out, just listening to your statements, I want to point out two main differences between theater and music, which are very obvious, but they have consequences. One main difference is that music has less narrative and is more abstract, while theater has always a narrative, it always has a sort of an impact, and is always bound to a language, and mostly in our European culture to a national language, and that is a problem. And that causes the question to me, is it a need, is it an obligation that the language of the dominant culture is the language on stage? Why is there only one language on stage? And how important is spoken language anyway? And how important is, and that is still an ongoing discussion, at least in German, and I guess also in French and many European theater, is the art of speaking, die Sprechkunst, is that a criterion of quality? And I think all the criteria of quality are one of our obstacles in decolonizing our view on art anyway, and especially if we are curating in the big representative world. Another difference is that theater is performed by actors or performers, and that raises the questions like who is allowed to represent whom in which context. By the way, Germany was one of the last countries in the world in which blackfacing was a normal theater practice. It's not that long ago that we still did that on our stages. And one strategy to get out of this dilemma of representation and representing by acting or performing is that everybody should represent everybody, independent from age, ethnicity, and sex, and that there should not be the identity of one actor or actress with one character. So the who represents whom is all the time shifting and changing, so we avoid any attribution. An interesting example in this field was the Schwarzkopie. That was a production made by the Münchner Kammerspiele and an artist called Anta-Helena Recke. And she copied a piece of another artist. It was a very German material, and she copied this performance minute by minute, but exchanged the cast from a white cast to a black cast. So she changed the perspective and changed the perception, and that was a really interesting conceptual activity, I think, or conceptual artwork. This was very much discussed in our theater community because it opened up to many questions. So if you start to curate in the post-colonial space, you are political whether you want it or not. You are leaving the canon of the national representation. You are leaving the European canon. You present or produce new formats, you have to, hybrids, which do not fit in any category of genre and not fit always in the expectations of representation. So you have to be experimental and you have to be more reflected. And very important, you are confronted with all sorts of contradictions and self-contradictions, which can be turned into something productive or into unproductive conflicts, which I had suffered at the Ruhrtriennale here and there. You and the audiences have to accept other narratives, also those which are disturbing, which are inconsistent with the mainstream and dominant culture's narratives. German perspectives and German taboos are not everybody else's perspectives and taboos. And that is something we have to accept. In my regard, it is important to create an open space, and I think it's even the heart of our work, to create an open space of different narratives, especially those which are disturbing, to make us aware of our own contradictions by realizing heterogeneous realities. You have, if you are inviting and co-producing or commissioning work, you have always to question your own position. It is already a colonial attitude to collect performances from all over the world, judge them with your Western taste and just present them in a Western festival. And then you ask yourself, what are the criteria of your judgment? If we question our criteria or European criteria of quality and taste, we discover there seems to be a European taste policy inside ourselves. And so we want diversity in our program, but the diverse and the other should cooperate with this taste policy. For example, I commissioned in the Ruhr Triennale in my first year a work by Burkina Faso and Belgium-based choreographer Serge Koulibaly. That was in the first edition. And he and his dramaturg was Felvin Sarr, created a sort of dance essay about the mythologies of the pre-colonial time and their influence into present West African societies. When I went to the rehearsals, I had a problem with the aesthetic and some dramaturgical problems, because some things were too outspoken in my regard. I could discuss about the dramaturgical problems, but about the aesthetic, there was no discussion possible, and they told me that is your white European taste. And so I felt they are partly right. So that brought me to the question, what can we present, what can we produce in which context? Because I felt that this work, and that was also the history of that work, that resonated much more to African audiences than to European audiences. So I asked myself, how ready are we to really go into other contexts, achieve more knowledge about them, more background knowledge, and how ready are we to really accept other aesthetics? And I guess that is something which is also in the music field a question.
I would like to sort of like take that up and also like throw it out to the rest of our panel. I mean, you bring up many things, the quality and equality issue, also the question of taboos. We've already heard this morning that we should stop fetishizing world premieres. Probably there's a lot of things, a lot of other things we should stop fetishizing as well. And now we're in the question of how things resonate in one place or another. I wonder if Duyun, Sharif, or Artyom, if you want to jump in on any of those issues.
I think that in some practices, music is absolutely very political, can be very political, especially if you know who gets to practice what, who gets to sing what, why there are girls who are not taught a certain type of songs, a certain type of dances, that knowledge are not being passed on. If a woman use that language in itself, it's already a political act. So those are the nuances, and for instance, a certain practice, use of their voices, female quality singers would never sing as that of the male singer. So if you were to combine that gender form as well, so that in itself, and they would actually be shunned by. So if a person to say that I wanted to experiment with that in itself, it is a political act. So I think I'm trying to get here is that it does need another layer of telling or communicating that nuances in itself is political, if I'm making sense. So sometimes it's not just words, right? Sometimes it's just understanding of that, what the practices getting what other practices, who can do that practices, and in Europe or in US or in most countries that because knowledge is all, everyone can do that. So it's less of the problem here.
I'm very interested, and now we're talking about the specificities, particularly since you brought up language, and that was already in the air this morning. We're talking about the specificities of the precision of working with very particular practices, and how to kind of work between those or work with them. I was very interested, Sharif, that you at the beginning said also that you felt strongly that within an improvisational praxis, music is universal. This is one of the kind of expressions that we've become used to sort of trying to give up talking about, of course, Western European classical music as being universal. But can we get back to talking about the way that music works, that we can work with music across different specific practices, could still have a universality in there, or is there a conflict there?
No conflict at all. On the contrary, in my opinion, music is universal in its essence, and it's also political in its essence. It's in a way, it's a language stripped of its of a clear narrative, but it's still a language. So it's, in my opinion, extremely political. You don't even need to give example where the political narrative is obvious, like in the examples that Duyun was giving, in cases where indeed you can do a political act by, let's say, having a women here in Lebanon playing a man's instrument, or what is recognized as a man's instrument. So this is a clear political action, but even at sub levels, it's extremely political because it is language, and all language is political. There's a book by a British musician, Eddie Prevost, which is titled "No Sound is Innocent." So I think I fully abide by this title and its meaning, and the book is really interesting to read.
Thank you. Yes, go.
To you, do you think you would not think that in the area of music is very much dominated by a Western taste? So that...
To me, sorry?
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. There is a huge Western, it's power is in the West. Not only taste, I mean, money is in the West. The West controls the narrative around music. That's very clear. And to change this, I think part of this seminar is on how to change this, if I understand it correctly, how to change the fact that the West controls the narrative. How can curators create their own narratives who are not, who are innovative, who are new, who reach new grounds? So yeah, it's a start. I mean, this has started. Of course, it's not starting now with this seminar, but we have a long way. We have a very long way. I mean, these are themes I like to talk about, but maybe we don't have enough time to go into at least how we see this in the Arab world currently. Of course, the Arab world is entirely over politicized for understandable reasons. So maybe we suffer from this also in the musical realm as well. And of course, it's been years since I started doing music that I'm confronted with how the West is trying to impose a specific narrative on me as an Arab musician, and how to resist this narrative, which is, it's an ongoing process. I'm telling young musicians now who complain about this, don't complain too much, just prepare yourself. This will never go away. It will never go away. It will follow you all your life. Just stay calm and learn how to protect yourself, to defend yourself. Deny, like, for instance, deny that you are expressing, let's say something very cliche, but I'm not expressing the war in my music. I'm not, you know, and I keep saying it. I don't express the war in my music. My music doesn't express the war. And I keep getting asked again and again and again, why we heard the war in your music? Surely the war must have had an impact on your music, and you just have to keep saying no, 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 no. Forever. It doesn't stop. I mean, I hope it will stop. The day it stops, maybe we can say that the West is no longer controlling the narrative, maybe.
Okay, is it euphemistic that we are even, I mean, even if we can agree that we live in political times and when we work in the arts, it's political whether we like it or not, is it even a euphemism to be talking about power and politics? We should just be talking about money and redistribution of you know, that kind of decolonization, which is material. Is it just a euphemism that we're talking about all these kinds of other terms and concepts and so on?
Yes.
Yes. Actually, I would already now begin to pick up some of the questions that have been coming in from the chat and from YouTube, and I would. It's a free for all between the four of you. Which one takes it up? I have the first one here from. Sigali had one. Do such civilized and organized discussions as we're having now still contain the possibility for change? Would the best form of solidarity with Sharif Senawi in Lebanon not be to stand with political struggles against climate change and systematic forms of geopolitical oppression? Maybe in the spirit of saying we should like talk about bigger issues than power within curating and so on. Mm-hmm. Should we be talking about the climate, systematic geopolitical shifts and oppression, a point which we've just arriving at now in the dialogue? How can we move that forward?
We can always talk about.
I feel there are many questions within this question. I don't know if someone else, everybody agrees.
Maybe Artyom, you have something to say also about this idea. You have the idea of like secondariness of art following geopolitical issues, and that maybe we can turn that around and make it primary. That art is driving those issues. Maybe you have something to say about this.
Yes. Somehow it is something connected to what Stephanie was saying about the process of getting more and more multicultural, and the process of globalization, and the processes of exchanging cultures and exchanging the concepts and exchanging with the ideas coming from the West. I think this process of getting more and more intercultural, the more and more diverse in the sense of components of the culture, is not the goal by itself. It's not the aim. It's something which goes by itself. We cannot say we work for this. It goes by itself. The question is, either we are secondary, either our activities are secondary going because of this process, or our artistic ideas are giving the overall direction, the overall mission to this. And such global mission should be there, because in other case, we still are dealing with the endless variety of individual artistic views. It was great thing in the middle and in the end of 20th century, but my personal, maybe not so popular, but still my personal point of view, that today, instead of the endless variety of individual points of view, we have to move toward to the creating somehow the phenomenon of ideas of collectively generated. Because in my personal point of view is that the task, the goal of our artistic activity today is to reach the deeper or the wider level of consciousness, the wider level of understanding the very basics of our life, the very basics of our creative abilities, the very basic of what is the purpose of human beings on the planet. I know it sounds strange and utopic and etc., but yes, it is how it is. The process of globalization is there anyway. Let's think where
forward.
Where it calls us exactly.
Absolutely. Yes. Because otherwise we just stuck in these terms and words, exactly. And we lose each other in the process. I feel, I think that we lose each other and then we're too holding our pigeonhole. Oh, this is what we have done, we should fix it. And then we're forgetting why we are doing the music in the first place.
Exactly. Yes.
And
because if before we would, in the end of 20th century, in music, we would say there is a, let's say, group or a camp of new complexity people and minimal music and, let's say, electronic music. And here where we can say there is music coming from Europe, music coming from Middle East, music coming from Asia. We still are dealing with this endless variety. It's not new. It's just new components within the old-fashioned logic and within the old-fashioned structure of how it works. And it will be like that by itself.
Just to add one point is just, I was saying earlier in my presentation, was about that is sometimes I think that I think people like us, we get a bit tired of the idea of representation, the exhausted of, we always have to talk about the ownership of the representation and not. And then I wanted to, invite all of us to really look at our eyes and then saying that, you know, this is the people who are you interested in. It's the people, it's the individuals you're interested in. And don't let the other, sometimes don't let the ideas to really fear and saying that you can't do that, you can't do this. And just celebrate the people. And then by actually inviting them to talk, and they don't have to subscribe everything that you say, right? But that's why we are doing the diversity.
I would just like to ask if there's any questions also from the people here in Berlin. And meanwhile, while you're thinking about that, you're welcome to move to the microphone if so. We take another question from online, following up. It might even be one for Stephanie, as we're here in Berlin. It concerns the fact that we have the Fridays for Future demo going on outside, and the question is, are they more effective than us? Yeah, that's a straight up one.
Yeah, it's a huge performance, of course, they are doing. And yeah, they are today, of course, in the moment, they are for sure more effective, and they have possibly real consequences. And I think in the arts we have these are long-term effects. I want to bring one example from theater. I wrote once in an essay that theater in post-colonial parts of the world is a colonial construction because it's brought to African countries, South American countries, also by colonial languages. And a long time you could see that these ways how theater was produced and played and performed followed along those lines what these French and English institutions had brought there. Since 20 years, I think there is a process the other way around. There are very political subject matters and very subjective way of performances created in the Arabian countries, in African countries, in South American countries, and theater artists here start to imitate that. So I think that the effects of art go in processes and go by communication in communications, and of course art, a big difference to a demonstration or manifestation is that that is for me still one condition of art, that it has to bring us to a territory where we have not been yet. It has to bring us to a complexity which we don't have in the thoughts of a discussion. It has to bring us somewhere else. And I don't mean it as escapismus, I mean it as to another territory of our minds. And I think that is something we can all agree with, whether we do theater or music or literature or whatever.
Yes. So the following up from follow-up question coming through now is that are we just diverse in our trip to climate and political apocalypse? Do the arts not have a role to play in trying to stop this? Has experimental music lost its cultural legitimacy? And it's very interesting what you just said, Stephanie, about the provocative way of seeing that maybe theatre as such is a Western construct which doesn't necessarily make sense to we can't unproblematically talk about theatre elsewhere until we start to understand these processes flowing both ways. Does anybody want to jump in on this about the legitimacy of experimental music and contemporary music? Yeah, okay.
I can jump in.
Yes.
I don't understand why the question is pointing out experimental music or contemporary music. This is basically relevant to all arts, if I'm not mistaken. This question is relevant to all. to all arts.
You mentioned before you sort of flew past
Culture
the
in
statement, sorry, that experimental music doesn't exist. Do you want to explain that for us a bit more?
I meant it's not a kind of music, you know, it's not a genre. It's a generic word we use to put together many different things, basically.
So it's a strategy, it's a path, it's a way, it's not a genre, yeah.
Yeah, it's not a genre. Like you can say I play rock or I play classical or I play experimental. It's not a style. Like it's not a. Yeah, I think pretty clearly it's not. But correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, the way I usually explain it here in Lebanon, because I'm trying to, if I go on TV or something and I have to explain to people who have absolutely no clue what I'm talking about, I will usually say that experimental music is not a genre. It's an approach that can be applied to any kind of other music, basically. So that's the way I define it, but I'm not sure it's accurate, but it kind of gets my point across.
Absolutely, thank you very much. Okay, we have a question from here in Berlin.
Hello. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on curating, like the productional side of preparing a festival's program or an ongoing program in a house. But what I kind of missing here is the question on, are you creating like also an audience? Are you curating how an audience is built up and put together in a more diverse way? If we look at the, well, German or Western European audience in classical or contemporary music, it's basically elder, well, white, not very diverse audience. So how do you work with that side, not the production side, but the audience side?
Is it to me or?
I'm expecting 4 very different answers here.
Yeah,
maybe everyone wants
perhaps
to chip
it's
in.
too long the question for
Yeah.
these few minutes we have here. But
Okay, but diversity in audiences, maybe we have like four versions of answers to that, sort of very context dependent. Ready, steady, go.
Shall I?
Yes, great.
Yeah, it's again the very much parallel in the reality of Sharif's musical life, because when we perform experimental avant-garde contemporary music in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, we always have somehow to find a key to the audience. What is this? Why they come to listen to this? And just naturally, without putting a special concept behind it, just very naturally, we understood that, again, it's very basic thing. We simply have to talk with people. Instead of presenting a pre-existed idea, we understood that we have to involve our audience into the collective process of understanding, into creating the sense of what's going on right here, right in this moment, in between us. So in this sense, we are creating our audience during and because of our performances. And later on, we understood that it is actually not only about contemporary music particularly, it's about any kind of music. Because if you go to a concert of classical music, it's again sometimes very much about cliches, like they are playing music on the stage where we're sitting in our place, and then we just put a cross in our list of cultural capital, let's say. Our cultural capital is now richer because we went to a concert of Berlin Philharmonic. Yeah, and I think that the future, and actually the reality now, is that we have to reconsider this also, to reconsider the role of an audience, why we are playing music to these people. And my personal answer, because we want to talk to these people in very personal way. And here it doesn't matter, are these people professionals, experts in music, or they're amateurs, or they're just pedestrians on the street. It's all the same. We have to find a way of real talk with people, not only exchange on informational level, but also exchange on emotional and spiritual level. That's my answer.
Very much, Artyom. Unfortunately, we're at the end of the panel here. Already in the first keynote, we had about 200 issues on the table, in very fast succession, and now a lot more have come up, which we can't manage, unfortunately, to take one by one. So I just would like to thank all the panel members for putting out your different positions on all these very many different issues. Which sort of swarm around the idea of curation and of diversity, but so much else as well. I'd like to thank everyone who's been listening to this panel, and yeah, just conclude by saying that we're really looking forward to what comes next, and obviously being in contact, having a debate like we're having today is just a part of it, and yeah, feeding into these local practices and audiences is the other half, which we can't represent today. So, thank you very much, everyone.